Welcome to Wind Down Wednesday. Here are your hosts, Jeffrey Tobias Halter and Amanda Hammett.
Well, good afternoon. Today we are talking with Meredith Moore about power dynamics and money. So my name is Amanda Hammett, and today I'm drinking a latte well into the afternoon, evening. I probably won't sleep tonight, so we'll see how that goes. Jeffrey, how are you? And what are you drinking?
I'm doing great. So today I've gone back to one of my favorites. It's a Black Girl Magic by the McBride sisters out of Napa Valley.
Nice.
And I love it. It's a nice light rosé, but it's got a little fizz to it. So always a pleasure, and I love to give a shout out to those folks. So it's my honor today to introduce Meredith Moore. Meredith is a friend and a colleague. We'll get into how we know each other in just a minute. But Meredith Moore brings a passion for lifelong learning to her role as founder and CEO of Artisan Financial Strategy. She is a subject matter expert in women and money, focusing on women breadwinners and how this can impact personal relationships. She's also one of the only public survivors of glioblastoma or brain cancer. And in her words, she's been successfully kicking its ass for 17 years. She was diagnosed 6 weeks after giving birth to her son. She holds a Bachelor of Industrial and Systems Engineering from Georgia Tech and is a 2017 graduate of Leadership Atlanta and a 2021 Atlanta Business Chronicle Woman of Influence honoree. She has spoken at over a dozen Fortune 500 ERGs, the Wall Street Journal Women in the Workplace event, and the Women of the Wall Street Journal Secrets of Women of Wealth podcast. Her articles on power dynamics of money have also been published and quoted in publications such as Forbes, U.S. News and World Report, Retirement Daily, Median, and Thrive Global.
Well, Meredith, welcome to Wind Down Wednesday. So what are you drinking right now?
Well, it's a nice evening here. I love my California Pinot Noir. I have to have a little bit of fruit on my red wine, and I'm embarrassed to tell you I am not a wine snob. I wish I could say that I was. And actually, I'll do an experience share. I went to a wine bar here in Atlanta, had the sommelier put a bunch of stuff in front of me to really understand my palate. And that's how I learned what I liked. So it is not beneath me to have Black Hawk box wine. And it's back to lean into what you like, and let's get rid of all the pretentiousness that's around wine and money for that matter.
Yes.
So
That's so funny. We're going to have to do a show just on wine, Amanda, someday. I know our listeners are just dying for us to riff on that. But anyways, we've got to move on. Meredith, it's been a while since we've talked. So good to see you. Gosh, how many years has it been? 8 or 9?
Yeah.
We met at Georgia Tech at a talk. And, from the first time talking, I was so inspired by your personal story. And not just your personal story, but also having started in Women in Wealth and now built out an entire women's leadership strategy. So give our listeners your personal story and short background, because I know I can listen to you for an hour.
Yeah, there's hour-long keynotes on this, but yes. So basically, the story is I had sort of this metaphorical trajectory of success, and got married, had a child, kept in this line. Things were happening as they needed to in this metaphorical success timeline. And 6 weeks after having my son, I started getting headaches. And bottom line is I was diagnosed with something called a glioblastoma, which is what Ted Kennedy and John McCain had, also local to Atlanta. It's what Jovita Moore had. Very few people survive within 6 months. A long-term survivor is considered 5 years. And as of June 1st, that'll put me at 17 years this year. And certainly those that have survived, there are very, very few, none are public. And so I feel a sort of karmic obligation. I talk to families multiple times per month, friends of friends of friends who get this diagnosis and don't know where to go, who are the physicians that really specialize in this. I will also say it had a botched craniotomy right here in Atlanta. So I've sort of written the book, if you will, and still speak at some oncological conferences with survivors. They just don't know what to do with me because I'm on my game and I'm hyper aware of, effects and like having gone through this over a long period of time.
Wow.
And tell us about your work. Tell us.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Okay, so you asked about my personal story. Okay, so my professional story is since I graduated from tech, I started a financial advisory practice. And over time, that's morphed to where in 2017, I did a lot of research with academics, specifically around what I was starting to see with women breadwinners in my office. There were a lot of issues on who makes the decisions, especially if she was making more money, and how those interactions worked as a couple. So I went to academia, interviewed a bunch of them, got data points, wanted to marry that with sort of my experiential side. And then, as you pointed out, we started really building this out. I started doing a lot of writing, and I also host a luncheon series in Atlanta for women in senior leadership. There is very much of a need for people to be able to talk to others about real things. While there's 1,000 women's networking stuff, there's very few things for women in senior leadership where you can have real conversations and then be able to talk about personal relationships and how money comes into it.
Wow. So Meredith, I love that you're coming on here and you're telling us about your story and your passion. And I think this is really interesting, especially this intersection of women and money. Can we talk some about your clients and the work that you're currently doing and maybe even let's share a success story?
Yeah, absolutely. So my practice has morphed to where, we've really started to work with more wealthy women. I would tell you over time, I do a lot of give backs, as you guys mentioned, and doing a lot of speaking. But I think where we should really focus might be on what are the dynamics that I'm seeing in the practice. And that tends to be what I typically see. Either she has more income, and out of necessity, at some point, a lot of times the male spouse may stay at home. And that can create a lot of times, in my experience, resentment on her part, because we're stuck with these sort of old gender dynamics and what is my role supposed to be? The reality is 29% of women in the US, married women, are breadwinners, and that number has consistently been going up. And what I'll also say is you may have women that are getting significant restricted stock units if they're working for a big company. And so the net worth might be greater. And so what I'm finding is there's this unspoken income disparity. And then how are decisions made as a couple? I will tell you, I wouldn't necessarily call this a win from a client perspective, but Amanda, I want to share the story. So we did have somebody that came to me. She was an equity partner at a law firm. She was making over $1 million a year. And this is not uncommon. Her male spouse stayed at home. Again, we can get into that too. But the reality was she had never been engaged in the finances. And it wasn't for lack of intellect. It wasn't for lack of ability, but it was done in the spirit of delegation, which is the biggest issue I see right now. If she's the breadwinner, she's delegating to him because he has an MBA, he likes investments, he took accounting 101 in undergrad. Whatever the reason is, if she's not engaged in the finances, it creates problems because in this case, he ended up asking her for a divorce. And she knew nothing about it. And it wasn't that she couldn't get up to speed, but the divorce was 2 to 3 times more expensive than it needed to be because she didn't know how to negotiate. There was not a balance sheet. There was not an advisor. There was nobody she had to lean on. And so, look, for those of us out there, women and men, we delegate. That's what we're taught in business. That's what we're taught in corporate America. But there are certain things in life that you don't want to 100% delegate. And so I talk about 2 basic tenets around money and relationships. It's education. And then more importantly, in many ways, it's engagement. And then what does that engagement need to look like? What's that meeting cadence? How are bigger, better conversations had as a couple to manage the finances? And look, a lot of us don't want to do deep dives. We want high level views, but there are people out there, men and women for that matter, that don't even know the high view. It's like we're busy doing. And it's so critical because, again, people get hit by proverbial buses. COVID just happened. And I'm here to tell you, divorces happen all the time, and they happen at a higher rate with the kind of client that I work with. And to not know what you have is very problematic.
Meredith, you brought up a couple of really great points. And I want you to dig even deeper into some of these power dynamics. I mean, first and foremost, I'm from the Midwest. We don't talk about money. We don't like to talk about money. We certainly don't like to get into deep discussions, particularly around long-term wealth planning. And then you add in a dynamic of potentially one spouse earning more than the other. And I'm not just going to say a woman's spouse, that could also be a man. Mm-hmm. Give us a little more depth around some of those power dynamics. How do you even start this conversation?
Right. So there's three things to think about. And this research has been done by a big academic up at one of the SUNY institutions. So typically the person that's going to hold more power in the relationship around money is going to be dictated by one of three things. Number one, income, which we just talked about. Also age. If he or she is older, they might have more experience. The third thing is education. I kind of touched on that. So there's this unspoken thing. Somebody has an MBA and all of a sudden they're empowered to make all the financial decisions for the couple. We know that's not the case, but those are the three things. I break it down to this. And I say this, the reason and the way I came up with this is, please understand this. I've been married twice. I was not the breadwinner in my first relationship, and there were massive power dynamics, and I was never enough. Because of that, I wasn't earning enough in that relationship to be worthy. If we want to we can go there too. I definitely am the breadwinner in my current marriage. So I've seen it from both sides. And ironically, Jeff, I catch myself doing and saying some things. Now I haven't done it, but I catch myself that happened in my first marriage. So I feel like not only this sort of subject matter expert on the professional side, but also on the personal side. So here's the solution that I break it down. Is I believe that in communication and transparency, as uncomfortable as it is, I don't think you have to be from the Midwest to say the stuff is we don't talk about it, but how do you create a meeting cadence as a couple with very specific things you want to get done? So I break it down to weekly, monthly, quarterly, and annually, and very specific things need to happen. So weekly are probably things we're all already doing, but I'm still going to put it out there. That's where you download any financial transactions. If you use an online tool like Mint or Quicken or something like that, and paying bills. Again, the weekly is pretty easy, where a lot of us are doing it. The monthly is where it gets dicey and falls into this area that we're talking about. It's critical that there be an audit of monthly living expenses. And the reason is if you are doing any sort of planning, you need to move towards goals. I always say people want to retire. I hate that word. I use the word work optional. If we're moving toward a work optional place in life, we got to know what your monthly nut is. So what does it take what do you need to be able to spend that? But nobody wants to look at the expenses because now judgments come in as a couple. Your wine budget is too high. Your shoe budget is too high. Your technology budget is too high, whatever your jam is. But it's being the critical part on the audit of the monthly. Sometimes just one person, most of the time, one person in the couple is doing that. It shouldn't be like that. If it can be done together to understand where you are, and then maybe changes need to happen, maybe they don't, but understanding where you are right now and or to rotate that to where that audit is done. It's the see no evil sort of way of thinking, like, I don't really want to do this because it's going to cause fights. But if anybody's engaging with any professional, that number is key to be able to do stress tests and know what you need to be saving to. So monthly is that audit. And again, that's where you got to manage the relationship and who's doing it. And then how I always view it, Jeff, like getting on a scale. Like, we know it sucks. It's a data point, but that's all it is. It's a data point. And then how do we make small changes if in fact changes even need to be made? Quarterly, I always say update your balance sheet or your PFS. Most people I know don't have one. Again, we can go into why having one is so critical. And the second thing quarterly is reviewing any investment statements that you're getting. And then annually, I talk about doing a deep dive review if you're working with a professional. So by creating this sort of standard cadence, it creates greater transparency. And it's really important. I do want to say one other thing that's a really important sort of fact. And this was also done by an academic in England in Lancaster. It's been proven that for when we have what we call partial pooling, meaning like a his, hers, and an ours bucket, discretionary money for her tends to be spent more on the kids in the household, where his discretionary money tends to be spent more on toys. Again, that's not a judgment. It just kind of is. It's a data point. And, that leads back to these power dynamics, and sometimes resentment pops up. And how do you negotiate those monthly expenses? The other interesting data point around this is as she becomes a breadwinner and consistently income is going up, the amount of housework that she is doing does not diminish as that number is going up. And so the housework is considered another sort of KPI, if you will, around the sort of breadwinner story.
Wow, I have all kinds of thoughts after that.
Sorry.
But I'd like to kind of point your insights to our millennials and our Gen Zs. I mean, millennials are having children at this point. They have a lot of young children at this point. Gen Zs are just thinking about getting into longer term establishing relationships.
Yep.
What kind of advice do you have for them as they're kind of early on in these phases, and how do we kind of set ourselves up for success?
Absolutely. And I think it comes back to creating the foundation on how we look at finances and having the bigger conversation with potential partners. Like many of the listeners here might not even be in a relationship, but it's critical that you have sort of habits around, like, again, downloading transactions, paying bills, auditing expenses monthly, building a balance sheet out so you know what you have in one place. How much student debt are you carrying? These are critical conversations to have with somebody before you get into a long-term relationship, because who's going to pay what? And how do you need to manage those relationships? It's no different than if somebody's married for 25 years. The difference is we know the two reasons why people get divorced, the two biggest reasons, and we know one is money. We know what the other one is, but that's a whole nother podcast. But it's laying the groundwork for that meeting cadence and building these things out, because if you are engaged and you understand your money, you'll know how to better communicate with your partner, your girlfriend, your boyfriend, whatever your jam is, to be able to have better conversations and how to manage that. So that's kind of my thinking on that, Amanda.
Well, there never seems to be enough time to talk about money. We've asked Meredith to come back on a future show. We're going to tease that a little. In the coming years, Boomer women are going to be inheriting $40 trillion in net worth, money that they've made, money that they've inherited from parents, money from their significant others. If you talk to your financial planner, it seems that men almost always die before women. And so this tremendous shift is going to mean huge things in just a few short years. Meredith, thank you for joining us today and sharing your insights on women, power dynamics, and wealth. You'll find more information on Meredith Moore on her website. She is always looking for more clients. She does a fabulous job with all of the clients she serves, but particularly high wealth women. Her website is www.artisanfsonline.com. So Meredith, thanks for joining us, and we're going to have you back real soon.
Thanks so much. I enjoyed our time together.
Thanks again for joining us for Wind Down Wednesdays, a contemporary midweek discussion on current workplace and marketplace issues with a focus on diversity, inclusion, intersectionality, and equality. I'm Amanda Hammett, and on behalf of myself and Jeffrey Tobias Halter, thanks so much for joining us, and we'll see you in the next episode.
Thank you for joining us for Wind Down Wednesday. If you like this episode, please subscribe to receive more episodes straight to your inbox.